And you good right there?
Hello, hello, hello. Chapter 9. We are almost through, I think. I don't know how many more chapters got. But welcome back to our podcast. Today we are doing chapter 9, which is record keeping, and it says it's more than paperwork. Record keeping is more than paperwork. So, what this chapter focuses on is how teachers manage and organize students' information so that it actually supports learning and not just grading. It reminds us that record keeping isn't just about entering grades, but it's making sure the information we collect is useful and accurate to a degree and help us make better decisions about how we go forward in teaching with our students. So, in chapter 9, there were 4 different topics. It was separate formative from summative assessments information, organize the entries in a grade book according to the learning represented, and track information about work habits and social skills separately from achievement information. And then the last one was record achievement information so you can interpret it accurately. So these connect back to what we've already talked about in previous chapters. So we're just building upon. We've talked about, having clear purposes, clear targets, and strong assessment design. So now we're learning how to organize all that information into a way to actually support student learning and communication. So, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to pass it off to the person who has the first discussion question.
Hi, I'm Indy Crudup, and I have learning target 1, which is separate formative from summative assessment information. So the key idea for this learning target is that not all assessment data serves the same purpose. For formative assessment, it's all about learning in progress. This is your practice work, your check-ins, your drafts, your let me see where you are moments, and low stakes or feedback driven. Sorry, it's low stake or feedback driven, and it's really meant to guide both you and your students. Summative, on the other hand, is the final product. This is where students are showing what they've learned at the end, like a completed project, a final design, or a test. What this looks like in practice, it can be tricky. Just because students complete something doesn't mean it should count toward their grade. Everything counts for learning, but not everything should count for a grade. Uh, sorry. And in my class, for example, when students are sketching out ideas for a logo or experimenting with typography and Illustrator, that's formative. That's where they're trying things, making mistakes, getting feedback, and growing. But the final logo design they submit, that's the summative. That's where I'm actually evaluating their mastery of the learning target. If I grade every single practice attempt, I'm not really measuring what they know. I'm measuring their learning process and sometimes even their struggle. And struggle is part of learning. So separating formative and summative assessments helps me do 2 really important things. First, it allows me to give students the space to learn without the pressure of every little thing being graded. And second, it helps me keep my grades accurate so they actually reflect what students know and can do. When students understand that practice is growth and final work is for evaluation, they tend to take more risks, ask more questions, and engage more deeply. And with that, I will pass it on to my fellow group member for learning target 2.
Oh, number 2, that is actually me. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so mine was organize the entries in the grade book. Oh, can y'all hear me? My thing just kind of circled.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, yep.
Okay. All right. So mine was my computer just is going crazy, y'all. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. I had to pull my notes up and it just started showing something crazy. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Like all these ads just popped up on my screen and I couldn't see you guys. So my discussion question was organize the entries in the grade book according to the learning represented. So one of the main ideas from this chapter is the way that we organize our grade book should be based on what students are learning, not just assignments that are complete. So that stood out to me because it shifts from focus from what did you turn in to what did you actually learn. That's why I think I don't really actually grade everything in my classroom, or I do, but I don't put everything in the final grade book. So, in my classroom, I don't always label things exactly like the chapter says, but I do organize my grading around learning, especially since my class is like a project based. So, for example, when we're working on projects, I break things down into different parts based on the skills that we're learning. So, just instead of grading one final project, I'm looking at different pieces, like in their planning, their understanding of the concept, and how they present the ideas. So, those are always separate grades that may equal up into a final grade. I also give points for everything. I mean, I also don't give points for everything. Like some assignments, like the guided notes and ethical discussions, I grade them as complete or incomplete. I don't feel like everything needs to be signed like a number or points, especially when the goal is just participation, thinking, or understanding. So I don't never want to give somebody points on an ethical discussion because it's their opinion, and long as they can back that up. So it's either a complete or incomplete. So to me, those types of assignments are more about learning and engagement and not performance. So I still check them. I still, talk with the students about them, but I don't always attach points to them. This actually connects to what the chapter is saying about being intentional with what we record. Not everything students do needs to go into a grade book as a grade, but it still matters for learning. And overall, organizing things this way, it helps me see where students are doing well and where they may need more support. So, like with the ethical questions and guided notes, I just making sure that they're participating with the guided notes, and with the ethical questions, just making sure they're actually they have to utilize vocabulary. That way, I know that they're using it correctly. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to the next one for the third discussion question.
So, learning target three is to track information about work habits and social skills separately from achievement information. So, one of the most important ideas in this chapter is this distinction between achievement and everything else we observe about students, like effort and participation behavior and work habits. And the authors are really clear that these are not the same thing and they should not be recorded or reported in the same way. And they make their point that while we gather a wide range of information from about our students, only some of it actually represents learning. So academic achievement is about what students know and can do relative to learning targets. And work habits and social skills, on the other hand, are behaviors that may influence learning, but they are not learning itself. And this becomes really important when we think about our grading. So if we combine achievement with behavior, what we end up reporting is not a clear picture of the learning taking place. It's more of a blend of performance, academic performance, and like compliance. And the chapter visualizes distinction, saying that there are kind of three categories of information. One of those is being everything students do for practice and learning, the subset of those things that reflect achievement, and then like a whole separate category for things like work habits, attendance, collaboration, all that good stuff. Um, and so only one of those categories, achievement evidence is supported for determining grades. And so that's a big shift in practice. Because in practice, many of us have been taught to value behaviors through grading, like penalties, participation points, effort grades, things like that. And those have historically been in mixed behavior into academic evaluation. But the chapter is arguing that um, what that's doing is distorts the meaning of the student's grades. And so if a student understands that, like, and they understand the math, but they struggle with organization. What does really a C mean if it's not a reflection of their understanding, but of their habits? So separating those categories um, allows us to be more accurate and more honest with students' grades. And because achievement tells us what students have learned, and work habits tells us how they're engaging in the learning process. Both of those things matter, but they answer different questions. And that distinction really sets up the broader question on how we organize and use the information in practice. And so, with that distinction in place, I'm gonna pass it over to Melissa to talk about what it looks like to record achievement information in a way that can be interpreted clearly.
Thank you, Michael. So I did have learning target number 4, which is the record achievement information so you can interpret it accurately. So my peers have talked about how the recording of it, what to choose to record. So now what do we do with it? So essentially, it's not just for paperwork And while, yes, it does give a student a grade, which we look at as a level of performance, it does also help us make informed instructional decisions. Whether we end up teaching the class again, reteaching, identifying students who are struggling, and all of that fun stuff. So the text talks about how the assessment information is only useful if it's organized and recorded in a way that we can actually use it to understand student learning. Um, so this made me think about like my own classroom because with project based, I was thinking that that'd be like a little bit hard. I do collect a lot of student work, but I don't always think about how I'm necessarily recording that information, and organization is the real key that is what stood out to me the most with it. Because in the separation of the formative and the summative information, we also need to break it up. So it shouldn't just be like Johnny got a 50, Sally got a 70. We need to see like, oh, did both of them get one wrong, but Sally just got these two parts better. Because it could be just like an overall everyone didn't do well on this one part, but we just focus on the overall lower grades. So, and to reiterate what my peers have said, the text does really emphasize not everything should go into the grade book, um, even though everything contributes to student learning. And I think that that's like really important. Because like in my class, we do a lot of like what Indy was talking about, like the practices of the tools, and that shouldn't be something that like I grade, but I should still collect the data and organize it in a way that can help me as the teacher identify areas of weaknesses, areas of strengths, because a lot of times we focus on just the areas of weaknesses, but it can also help us in areas of strength. For example, like in my class right now, in the two other times I've taught this class, everyone's done really well on spline modeling. Well, the group I have right now is not doing very well on it, but my previous levels have struggled with UV mapping, and this group is excelling on it. So it just, it really, having that better organized, I need to make it better organized, but being able to have it organized can help us to alter our lesson plans per the student and the group of students that we have. So just being, for me, more intentional to organize and use that data to our advantage. Because what's the point of collecting it if we're not going to use it? And with that, I am going to open it up to any comments, and if there's no comments, we can move into reflection.
All right. I had a comment about the way we grade because, like you said, we have the pretty much we are teaching tools. The way that I do mine, so it won't be as hard on the students and affect their grade as much. Like more of like the worksheets that I do with them to teach them the tools. I count that as like a classwork grade, which is like a lesser percentage than, let's say, if I gave them like a project, that's like a higher percentage. Like I count that as the summative grades. So I say like I tell them their projects are pretty much their test grades because I don't give them actual like multiple choice tests.
Same.
So yeah, that's how I do it.
Same. Like I use some things like for their PBM, they have to do an outline before they do the final. So like each section of the outline, I count as a test grade because I really don't give tests. So yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if nobody had anything else to add, I'll start out our critical reflection part. I had our first question, Lord, which is which ideas in this chapter did you find most convincing or useful and why? So one of the ideas from this chapter that I found most convincing and honestly the most useful is the importance of separating formative and summative assessment when it comes to record keeping. I think I think this stood out to me because it really challenged the way grading can sometimes happen in practice. The chapter makes it clear that while everything students do counts for learning. Not everything should count for a grade, which is what we were saying. And that really was what made me pause and reflect on my own classroom. In my class, students go through a full design process, brainstorming, sketching, experimenting, revising, and a lot of the work is messy. It's trial and error. So thinking about this as formative instead of something that should always be graded really makes sense. Sorry. It gives students space to grow and without feeling like every mistake is being penalized. Penalized. I cannot say that word right to save my life. And another idea I found very useful was organizing the gradebook entries by learning targets instead of just assignments. I love this because it shifts the focus from what did you complete to what did you learn. In a design class, that could look like tracking skills like typography and color theory or layout instead of just labeling something as project one or a poster assignment. And I also really appreciated the emphasis on keeping work. Sorry, got mixed up in my notes. Keeping work habits and behaviors separate from academic achievement. That's something that I think a lot of us have seen done differently in schools. And the chapter really explains why mixing those can actually distort what a grade is supposed to represent. It reminded me that if a student turns something in late, that doesn't necessarily mean they didn't understand the content. It just means there's something else going on that needs to be addressed separately. Overall, what made these ideas so convincing to me is that they all connect back to the fairness and accuracy. The way we keep records directly impacts how we communicate student learning, not just parents and administrators, but the students themselves. And with that, I left the part. Sorry. And for me, that's the biggest takeaway. If you want my grade, if I want my grades to actually reflect what my students know and can do, then I have to be intentional about how I'm recording and organizing that information. Sorry, got to scroll down on the paper. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to my fellow group mate for critical reflection 2.
That would be me. So I had reflection question number 2, which says, how does this chapter align with or challenge your own beliefs about teaching or learning? And I mentioned it a little bit in my pre-discussion, but it challenged my beliefs a little bit more on the organization, just because I've like seen grading as such like a task, to be honest, especially with larger projects in my class because they take so long to grade that the thought of like taking that and then organizing it is kind of like to me. So I guess that's more like challenging um, my ideas and beliefs. But I do see where the chapter like talks about how like it's important and I can see where it can be useful. So basically like I can identify the different elements and then take it with their learning progress and their growth and see really what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses. And I'm it's challenging me to not just record final grades, but to really look back and dissect the grading after everything is done. So that is my challenge, and mine is pretty short, but I'm gonna pass that one on to the next person.
That would be me. And yes, this chapter, I noticed that too. Like, it's so straightforward that it's hard to elaborate and make it longer. So hopefully we meet the time limits. But so my reflection question was the reflection question 3, and it's which strategy or idea from this chapter would you feel most confident implementing and why? So the strategy that I chose was separating academic learning from things like behavior, effort, and participation. I kind of already do this in my classroom because, as I mentioned on every podcast, it's a project based. Um, so when students are working in groups, I'm constantly walking around, observing and checking in, making sure everybody's participate. I can tell who's doing the work, who's contributing, and who's just not being as involved. But I do mix that directly with their academic grades. So the last project I did break it down like it's a project grade, but your overall grade is not going to be the same because everybody didn't do the participate, everybody didn't put in the right amount of work. And this is a good time for them to be like, okay, what did I do to make my grade get better? And I've walked around and said, well, what are you doing? Because I do that. What are you doing? Well, what part are you doing? Why are you just sitting here? I know you're not scrolling on your phone. So that's just kind of how it goes with my group works. So I handle it separately through conversations. Participation expectations are just redirecting them at the moment. So I kind of redirect them or let them know, okay, you're getting the participation grade, right? So you may not get the full points, right? So I let them know that. And again, it's broken down in my rubric too, so they'll know ahead of time versus, being surprised at the end. At the same time, I will say that this chapter made me reflect on my own consistency. I do this because I definitely want to be more consistent across the board in how I separate and track those things. There are times when it's clear in my head, but maybe not always clearly organized in my grade book as it should be. I also think this connects back to the relationships. A lot of times when a student isn't participating or completing work, there's something else going on too. So instead of just lowering a grade, I try to talk them about, talk to them and figure out what's going on. And again, try to redirect them and have them do something. This chapter really confirmed that for me, grades shouldn't reflect what students know and can do. I mean, they should reflect what students know and can do, not everything else that may be going on around them. I feel confident about this area, but it also pushed me to be more intentional and consistent in how I apply it. And I will give it to Michael.
Right. So mine is on the hesitation and or uncertainty. So the part of the chapter gives me pause is not really the idea of separating achievement from behavior. That part actually aligns very naturally with how I already think about teaching math. I've never really been somebody to give A for effort type stuff because in math, effort doesn't change the outcome. Either either the reasoning is correct or it's not. The student can read problem, solve the problem, or they can't. Um, Effort might support getting there, but it's not the same thing as understanding. So in that sense, I already separate achievement from behavior. The tension for me is not necessarily the grading, it's in the motivation and compliance. So um, because while the chapter argues that work habits and behavior should not be included in grades, students are not always motivated by learning itself, just the act of learning. And so, in my experience, most students are motivated by the grades, and so that creates a very real disconnect. For example, with homework, I typically grade for completion, not accuracy. And even then, I don't always check every single problem. I tend to spot check specific items that I want to discuss, and I use that as an opportunity to have like one-on-one conversations with students during the warm-up time. So in my normal practice, homework is clearly positioned as a practice, not as a measure of achievement. But there are exceptions to that. If we've had a lot of time or spent a lot of days working on a particular type of situation, to particular type of problem, I may grade homework for accuracy because I need to know whether can actually do it. Um, Independently. And let's say I'm out with a substitute, everything's going to change. Like everything changes. Like at that point, the work becomes both review and accountability. And I need students to understand that expectations don't disappear just because I'm not in the room. Um, and so in those situations, I'll grade the work more formally. Not because I believe it represents pure achievement, but because I need to maintain a normalcy of like engagement and responsibility. And so that's where my hesitation, kind of sits. The chapter suggests that we should not combine behavior with achievement. And I agree in principle, but in practice, grades often function as one of the only levers we have that to influence student behavior. Um, so when we remove what this chapter calls behavior from grading, the question becomes then what replaces it. Um, because saying this affects your learning does not always land with students. Like they don't care. It's about like what affects my grades. Um, and many students aren't yet motivated by learning. They're motivated by the grades. And so I found myself navigating a space where philosophically I agree with the separation, but practically I started to think about how to sustain engagement, how to sustain accountability, how to make sure they're consistent, especially in these situations where I'm not physically present to reinforce expectations. So, my tension is not with the idea itself, it's with, what it takes to make that idea actually work in an actual classroom. Um, and that's my 2 cents on that. And I'll go ahead and open it up or pass it back to Selena and close this out.
Well, I have a question because you talked about
Mhm.
substitutes.
Yeah.
Do you grade harder on the work that they supposed to do with subs? Because I don't know if anybody else have that issue. They think it's a substitute, it's a free day.
Yeah, I don't know where harder. I am much more. So when I have substitutes, I give them things we've already covered. So that nothing is learned on that day. It's like we've covered this, you've gone over this. This is review. This is time for me to spiral and whatnot. So yes, I'm looking at everything because I need you to be focused in that time frame. Um, So I would grade that classwork much harder than I would normally look at regular classwork because I need them to know you got to lock. If I'm not here, you better be better than when I am here. Um, so need to lock in at that point in time. So yeah, I guess short answer, yes, yes, I grade much harder when I'm not there. Because I want them to have that kind of mindset that, this is serious. If he's not here, we got to lock in and get this stuff done and do it right.
I think that's good. That'll be something I need to apply, make it more consistency, like, with that, because they just tend to think, oh, she not here. We thought it was a free day. I'm like, the stuff was on the board. What are you talking about?
Hmm.
So usually I lock it and they don't even get a grade for it because you didn't do it. No, you can't go do it later. So now I was
Hmm.
just wondering, anybody else have kids not do as much when subs are there, or how does it work?
Oh, of course, all the time. Um, and it's sad to say, and I'll admit that half the time, because of what I teach, it's a lot of I have to lead them through the software. The work that I do leave with a substitute, I mostly just count it as extra credits if they do it. But most time I just tell them just do work that they owe me for, like when I was there and I taught them and they just decided they didn't want to do it. That's their chance to make it up. And if they don't, then they just take that L.
Do you
One
bring
thing
it up like towards the end, be like, you had a chance when I wasn't here to do
Mm-hmm.
this? Okay,
Mm-hmm. Because
that's
when
what's
they
up.
start begging to play Moose Crew, nope. Because I done
but
gave every
even with
matter of
that
fact, every
extra,
Friday I give them time to make up anything they owe me.
Hmm.
So I don't even want to hear after that.
and see, that would be hard for me for extra credits because I got a kid right now who flat out got 100 in my class. Like the
Yeah,
last
I
time
got
I
one.
had him, he
He's
got like
like
100 point
perfect.
something. Yeah. So extra credits not going to do anything for him. You know what I mean? So, I
And
mean,
you know,
that's not one I have to worry about. I think what I do sometimes, like we have something called Knowledge Matters where they're like simulations online that they can do, or ed puzzles. I count those ed puzzles, or not ed puzzles. What is it? It used to be quizzes. Now it's called Wayground. They have
Right.
interactive videos. So I count them as quiz grades when I'm gone. And then I have it set up to where you can't keep clicking off, because the last time I did it, I was like, so everybody cheated? Because I can see y'all that clicked off the screen. I don't know every time. Okay, going forward, if you click off, you're done. So you can kind of like set those restrictions.
I'm slightly different actually. I actually have recent experience. I was out for 4 consecutive days. Um, but I use Genially and I make interactive like either lessons or tutorials and I make them follow that. So I actually make them model something. It's usually nothing like really large, but it's like I make them follow the interactive like thing and or like answer questions in it and they have to submit something. And my students are pretty my students are pretty good. Most of the time they do it and that's we like talk about it when they get back. And then yeah, so that's kind of like what I do. So I continue teaching in a way when I'm out. Um, and I just use the Genially, the interactive element to it to create like my lessons. Now it's never anything like brand new that they've never seen, but it's like a continuation lesson in
Mhm.
a way.
Yeah, pretty much building off something you already saw. That's what I try to leave to. But they'll still miss Crudup. I don't understand.
Yeah, because they don't
Mhm.
listen.
Because
Yeah,
they don't want to do it. They're lazy too.
yeah, yeah.
And they don't listen. You can get
Yeah.
directions and they be like, what did how we
Yes.
do this again?
And I told ask the person beside you because I ain't repeating it.
I just like, oh, so you wasn't listening to me.
Oh, I know
Okay.
they won't. And the thing
Figure
is,
it out.
I'll call them out in the middle of them. Like I could be teaching, they could be having a little side conversation, and I'll say, "All right, when it comes time to do the work, remember you was talking right now. Don't ask me for nothing."
Right. No, that's right. No, that's right.
Well, we can see that even though we all teach different things, even though they're CTE and we teach different things, we all can pull from this chapter and, apply it to our classrooms, because chapter 9, it reminds us that, record keeping is more than just entering grades. It's about organizing the information and the way that we can actually support our students. I think based on the conversation, all of us can pull from that. When we focus on learning instead of just assignments, we separate the behavior from achievement. We're more accurate with it, more fair, and more intentional in how we assess our students. Overall, I think that this podcast was really good. Every time we do talk about it, I was able to pull something from each one of y'all on how to do things. So I'm very grateful for it. But chapter 9 was kind of straightforward and to the tip. Not a lot of elaboration we can do on it, but we did our best. And I think we did a good job. So we appreciate you listening to us this week, and we'll be back with chapter 10.